Okay, the Canadian Pacific Railway. The overall message or theme of this virtual museum is to educate others on the Canadian Pacific Railway and how it still affects us today. I also want others to understand the history of the Canadian Pacific Railway and how it connects to some of the topics we learned in class. The Canadian Pacific Railway was founded in 1881 and completed in 1885. The railway ran from the east to the west coast, used as a transportation for mainly Canadian goods and commodities, which made it significant to Canada's economy as it promoted immigration and tourism. During the Second World War, the CPR also provided the military with transportation and armaments or military weapons and equipment. The railway grew and diversified to include steamships, hotels, airlines, mining, oil and gas exploration, delivery, and telecommunications companies. This is an official commemorative pin issued to employees and guests for the 75th anniversary of the CPR Ogden shops in 1988. While the shops are now managed by Alstom Transportation in order to consolidate overhaul services for freight cars, locomotives, and components, Canadian Pacific Railway headquarters will now also be on the property following a move from downtown Calgary. This is the Canadian Pacific Railway kitchen cap, striped cap used by the cooks on the Canadian Railway. The tag on front reads, Railroad Signals Kitchens Union Made. This was most likely part of the uniform cooks were required to wear. In 1878, Prime Minister John A. Macdonald promised to complete the CPR as it was important for the success of Canada. The railway was needed for the transportation of immigrant settlers to the prairies, to British Columbia, and goods, and to stop the Americans from laying claim to the prairies. The CPR had two major problems, not having enough money and not enough workers. The government solved both problems by providing millions of dollars towards the construction of the CPR and employing 15,000 Chinese workers who built the railway mainly in BC. Many of the workers died due to unsafe working conditions. The railway was completed in 1885. In order to construct the CPR, the government needed to extinguish Indigenous title to the land bound by the Royal Proclamation. A series of treaties from 1 to 7 was established. The treaty solidified Canada's claim to the lands north of the United States-Canadian border. Government negotiators made various promises to the First Nation peoples in exchange for their traditional territory. The promises were made orally and in written text of the treaties, including special rights to treaty lands, cash payments, hunting and fishing tools, and farming supplies. The numbered treaties have still ongoing legal, social, economic impacts on Indigenous communities. How the CPR came to be. In 1871, British Columbia was lured into confederation with the promise of a transcontinental railway within 10 years. The Pacific Scandal, when Prime Minister John A. Macdonald at the time and the senior members of the Consecutive Cabinet was accused of accepting election funds from shipping magnate Sir Hugh Allan in exchange for the contract to build the CPR. Finally, on October 21, 1880, the government signed a contract with the Canadian Pacific Railway Company, headed by George Stephen, the railway president. Difficulties in the construction of the CPR led to the demand for early completion, which would ensure generous provision to the CPR company, which included $25 million in cash and 25 million acres of land in a belt along the railway. The cost of the service, $37 million, and monopoly over transportation south to the United States for 20 years. The CPR company would also receive $22.5 million in loans due to the high cost of construction. This is the Titan Blue Streak chainsaw, weighing at almost 80 pounds. This 1947 chainsaw with a 5-foot cutting bar was considered light at the time, but it was reputedly quite a reliable machine. Using this saw was a two-man job since the engine's float carburetor had to be kept level when running by the main operator using the two bicycle-type handlebars. The cutting board with swivel to cut at any angle guided by the second logger using the stub handle at the far end of the bar. This is an actual photo taken of Chinese workers working on the Canadian Pacific Railway. These workers were crucial to the construction and the success of the Canadian Pacific Railway as the government needed more workers. It was easier, cheaper, and faster to get to British Columbia from Hong Kong than from Halifax. Creating a better transportation system was essential to connect the new confederation. This is a Canadian Pacific Railway track jack, railroad jack used on the Canadian Pacific Railway in Ontario. Jack is created from iron and has heavy rusting. The word symbol is embossed on the side in capital letters. This is the Canadian Pacific last spike. This spike was probably cast at a foundry somewhere in eastern Canada. It was one of around 30 million spikes put down by some 30,000 workmen during the building of almost 3,000 miles of railway between Montreal and Port Moody, British Columbia. Spikes were needed to secure the rails to the ties to keep the rails engaged. Spikes are still used today, although workers now drive them in with an automated device. Today,